The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bradley as guards prepared for another routine day. The military base buzzed with its usual activity. Soldiers marching in formation, vehicles moving supplies, and officers reviewing daily reports. Nobody expected that this ordinary Tuesday would become a day they would never forget. At exactly 800 hours, a figure appeared at the main gate. She walked slowly, dragging her feet against the concrete. Her clothes were torn and dirty, hanging loosely on her thin frame. Wild gray hair fell across her face, hiding her features. She carried a small weathered bag that seemed to contain everything she owned. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was on gate duty when he first spotted her. At 28, he had served 5 years at Fort Bradley and had seen many civilians approach the base. Some were lost tourists, others were family members visiting soldiers. But this woman was different. She looked like she had been living on the streets for months, maybe years. "Ma'am, this is a restricted military installation," Rodriguez called out as she approached the checkpoint. "You can't enter without proper authorization." The woman stopped and looked up at him. Her eyes were bright blue, surprisingly clear despite her disheveled appearance. When she spoke, her voice was steady and calm, not what Rodriguez expected from someone in her condition. "I need to speak with General Morrison," she said simply. Rodriguez exchanged glances with his partner, Corporal James Wilson. They had heard many strange requests over the years, but a homeless woman asking to meet with the base commander was definitely unusual. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but General Morrison doesn't take unscheduled meetings," Wilson explained patiently. "If you need assistance, I can direct you to local social services." The woman shook her head. "You don't understand. Tell him Sarah wants to see him. Sarah Mitchell." The name meant nothing to either guard, but something in her tone made Rodriguez pause. There was an authority in her voice that didn't match her appearance. Still, protocol was protocol. "I'll need to see some identification," Rodriguez said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a plastic card. It was old and worn, the edges cracked from years of handling. Rodriguez took it and read the name. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. The address was from another state, and the card had expired 3 years ago. "Ma'am, this ID is expired and it doesn't give you clearance to enter the base," Rodriguez explained. "I really think you should contact—" "Just call the general," she interrupted, her voice growing firmer. "Tell him Sarah Mitchell is here. Tell him it's about Operation Silent Thunder." Both guards froze. Operation Silent Thunder was classified. Information. How could this woman possibly know about it? Rodriguez felt his training kick in. This was no ordinary situation. "Wilson, stay with her," Rodriguez ordered. "I need to make a call." He stepped into the guardhouse and picked up the secure phone. After navigating through several offices, he finally reached General Morrison's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Davis. "Sir, we have an unusual situation at the main gate," Rodriguez began carefully. "There's a woman here claiming to know the general. She mentioned Operation Silent Thunder." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Davis spoke, his voice tense. "What's her name?" "Sarah Mitchell, sir. She looks like she's been living on the streets." Another pause. Rodriguez could hear muffled conversation in the background, as if Davis was speaking to someone else. "Sergeant, I want you to escort her to Building 7, Conference Room B. Do not let anyone else see her. Do you understand?" Rodriguez was surprised. Building 7 housed the base's most sensitive operations. "Yes, sir, but—" "No questions, Sergeant. Just do it." And Rodriguez? This conversation never happened. The line went dead. Rodriguez stared at the phone for a moment, then walked back outside. The woman was still standing patiently, seemingly unbothered by the delay. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me, someone will meet with you," Rodriguez said, still trying to process what had just happened. As they walked through the base, Rodriguez noticed how the woman carried herself. Despite her ragged appearance, she walked with purpose, her back straight. She didn't gawk at the military equipment or seem intimidated by the armed soldiers they passed. It was as if she belonged here. They reached Building 7, a nondescript concrete structure that most people on base avoided. Rodriguez used his security card to enter and led her down a hallway lined with unmarked doors. Conference room B was at the end of the corridor. "Please wait here," Rodriguez said, opening the door to reveal a simple room with a table and several chairs. "Someone will be with you shortly." The woman nodded and entered the room. As Rodriguez closed the door, he caught one last glimpse of her sitting at the table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Minutes later, Rodriguez heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Multiple sets of boots moving quickly. He stepped aside as several high-ranking officers hurried past, their faces grim. He recognized General Morrison among them, along with Colonel Davis and Major General Patricia Hayes, the base's intelligence chief. The officers disappeared into conference room B, and the door closed with a heavy click. Rodriguez remained at his post, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? How did she know about classified operations? And why were the base's top commanders dropping everything to meet with her? Through the thick walls, he could hear the murmur of urgent conversation but couldn't make out any words. The meeting seemed to go on forever. Other personnel began to gather in the hallway, drawn by the unusual activity. Officers whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the door opened. General Morrison emerged first, his face pale and serious. The other officers followed, their expressions equally grave. They walked past Rodriguez without a word, their footsteps echoing as they disappeared around the corner. Rodriguez waited, unsure of what to do next. Finally, the door opened again and the woman stepped out. But something had changed. She stood taller now, more confident. Her blue eyes seemed sharper, more focused. Even her disheveled hair couldn't hide the transformation that had taken place. She looked at Rodriguez and smiled. Not the uncertain expression of a homeless woman seeking help, but the knowing smile of someone who had just reminded others exactly who she was. "Thank you for your assistance, Sergeant," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority. "I believe arrangements are being made for more appropriate accommodations." As she walked away, Rodriguez noticed that her shuffling gait had been replaced by the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. He stood alone in the hallway, more confused than ever, knowing that he had just witnessed something extraordinary, but having no idea what it meant. The base would never be the same. Within an hour of the mysterious meeting, Fort Bradley was buzzing with activity unlike anything the soldiers had seen in years. Orders flew through the chain of command at lightning speed. Security protocols were upgraded immediately. Several buildings were suddenly declared off limits to all personnel below colonel rank. General Morrison sat in his private office, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from him sat Colonel Davis, who kept checking his watch nervously. The silence between them was thick with tension and disbelief. 47 years, Morrison finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's been missing for 47 years and she walks in here like it was yesterday." Davis shifted in his chair. "Sir, are we certain it's really her? I mean, the physical changes alone." Morrison pulled out a classified file from his desk drawer. The folder was marked with the highest security clearance and bore a date from 1977. He opened it carefully, revealing photographs and documents that few people had ever seen. "Look at the eyes, Davis," Morrison said, pointing to a black and white photograph. "Those eyes don't lie." And the way she described Operation Silent Thunder, details that were never written down, never recorded anywhere. Only 3 people knew those specifics, and 2 of them are dead. The photograph showed a woman in military uniform, her posture rigid and professional. Captain Sarah Mitchell, age 32, United States Army Intelligence. Her bright blue eyes stared confidently at the camera, full of determination and purpose. It was unmistakably the same woman who had sat in conference room B an hour earlier, despite the decades that had passed and the hardships that had clearly marked her face. "What happened to her, sir?" Davis asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Morrison closed the file slowly. "That's classified beyond your clearance level, Colonel. But I will tell you this. Sarah Mitchell was one of the most brilliant intelligence officers this country ever produced. She disappeared during a mission in 1977. We presumed she was dead. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Major General Hayes entered without waiting for permission. Her face flushed from running. "Sir, we've got a problem," she announced. "I've been trying to verify her story through our intelligence networks. Half the contacts she mentioned shouldn't exist anymore, but when I reached out to verify, they're all still active, sir. Assets we thought were compromised decades ago are still in place." Morrison leaned back in his chair, the weight of this revelation settling on his shoulders. "Are you saying she's been running operations all these years?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Hayes admitted. "But there are fingerprints of her work everywhere once you know what to look for. Arms deals that went wrong at exactly the right time. Information leaks that helped us track terrorist cells. Rescue operations that succeeded, against impossible odds. Sir, if she's been active all this time, then she's been doing it completely off the books," Morrison finished. "No support, no backup, no official status." The three officers sat in stunned silence, each trying to comprehend the implications. A decorated intelligence officer, presumed dead for nearly 5 decades, had been conducting covert operations as a ghost agent. The homeless woman who had appeared at their gate might be responsible for saving countless lives and preventing numerous international incidents. "Where is she now?" Morrison asked. "Guest quarters in Building 12, Hayes replied. "I posted 2 guards outside, but I have a feeling they're more for show than security. If she wanted to leave, I don't think we could stop her." Morrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base where soldiers continued their daily routines, unaware of the earthquake that had just shaken their world. "Get me Secretary of Defense Patterson on the secure line. This goes all the way to the top." While the senior officers grappled with the impossible situation, word was spreading through the base in the way that rumors always do in close military communities. Soldiers whispered during meals, speculated during training exercises, and exchanged theories during off-duty hours. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself at the center of attention. Everyone wanted to hear his first-hand account of the mysterious woman. He told the story dozens of times, each retelling adding to the growing legend. "She knew things," Rodriguez told a group of younger soldiers in the mess hall. "Classified things that no homeless person should know." And when she walked away from that meeting, it was like watching someone transform. Like she remembered who she really was. Private Jennifer Martinez, fresh out of basic training, leaned forward with wide eyes. "Do you think she's a spy? Maybe from another country?" "If she was foreign intelligence, they wouldn't have kept her here," Corporal Wilson replied. "They would have arrested her immediately. This is something else entirely." The speculation was interrupted when Master Sergeant Thompson, a 30-year veteran, approached their table. His weathered face was serious, and the younger soldiers immediately fell silent. "You all need to stop talking about this," Thompson said quietly. "I've seen situations like this before, and they don't end well for people who can't keep their mouths shut. Whatever happened today is above our pay grade." But Thompson's warning only made the mystery more intriguing. Throughout the evening, small groups of soldiers gathered in quiet corners, their voices low as they tried to piece together the puzzle. Some theorized she was a former prisoner of war who had finally escaped. Others suggested she was an undercover agent whose mission had gone wrong decades ago. Meanwhile, in the secure communications center of Building 7, encrypted messages flew between Fort Bradley and Washington, D.C. at unprecedented volumes. Pentagon officials who rarely spoke to anyone, below 4-star rank, were suddenly demanding detailed reports from base commanders. The Defense Intelligence Agency activated protocols that hadn't been used since the Cold War. In her guest quarters, Sarah Mitchell sat on the edge of a narrow military cot, finally alone for the first time in hours. She had showered and changed into clean clothes provided by the base, though they were simple military-issue garments. Her bag sat on a small table nearby, its contents now spread out as she took inventory. The items told a story of survival that spanned decades. A compass whose face was cracked but still functional. Foreign currency from countries that no longer existed. Photographs of faces that would mean nothing to most people but represented lives saved and operations completed. A small notebook, filled with coded entries in multiple languages. She picked up a particular photograph, a picture of herself and two other officers taken shortly before her last official mission. One face had been carefully crossed out with a red pen. The other belonged to a man who now ran the CIA's European operations, though he didn't know she was aware of his current position. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly gathered her belongings and opened the door to find a young officer holding a tray of food. "Compliments of General Morrison, ma'am," the lieutenant said nervously. "He thought you might be hungry." Sarah accepted the tray with a nod of thanks. As the officer turned to leave, she called after him, "Lieutenant, what year is it?" The young man looked confused. 2025, ma'am, September 7th. She smiled sadly. "Thank you. That's all." As the door closed, Sarah realized that despite everything she had accomplished in the shadows, despite all the lives she had saved and the threats she had neutralized, she had lost something that could never be recovered. Nearly 50 years of her life had passed in a blur of assumed identities and covert operations. She had become so good at being someone else that she had almost forgotten who Sarah Mitchell really was. The transformation that Sergeant Rodriguez had witnessed wasn't just about remembering her true identity. It was about deciding whether that identity was worth reclaiming after so many years in the darkness. The secure phone in General Morrison's office rang at 0300 hours, jolting him from a restless sleep in his on-base quarters. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that made his blood run cold. It was a direct line from the Pentagon's most classified operations center. "Morrison here," he answered, instantly alert. "General, this is Director Reynolds, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to talk about your guest. I'm flying in with a team. Have Building 7 cleared and prepare for a classified briefing at 0800. The line went dead before Morrison could respond. He sat on the edge of his bed, knowing that Sarah Mitchell's arrival had just triggered something much larger than a simple reunion. The DIA didn't send directors personally unless the situation involved national security at the highest levels. By dawn, Fort Bradley looked like a different place. Black SUVs with government plates had arrived during the night. Men and women, in dark suits, moved purposefully between buildings, their presence both obvious and mysterious. The base's regular personnel were given orders to stay in designated areas, away from the expanding security perimeter. Sarah woke before sunrise, her internal clock still attuned to decades of operational life. She had slept poorly, her mind processing the flood of memories that had been triggered by returning to an official military environment. Through her small window, she could see the increased activity and understood immediately what it meant. She dressed carefully in the uniform that had been provided, not the standard issue clothes from the night before, but a properly fitted dress uniform with captain's bars. Someone had done their homework overnight. The uniform was exactly her size, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw Captain Sarah Mitchell staring back for the first time in 47 years. A knock came at precisely 0730. When she opened the door, she found General Morrison himself, flanked by two colonels she didn't recognize. "Captain Mitchell," Morrison said formally, "I'm here to escort you to a briefing. Some people from Washington would like to speak with you." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity in his tone. "I assumed they would. Shall we go?" As they walked through the base, Sarah noticed how the regular soldiers stopped whatever they were doing to watch them pass. Word had clearly spread, though she doubted anyone knew the full truth. The mystery of the homeless woman was already becoming base legend. Building 7 had been transformed overnight. Security checkpoints had been established at every entrance. Electronic jamming equipment hummed quietly in the corners, ensuring that no unauthorized communications could enter or leave the area. The conference room where she had met with Morrison the previous day now contained a large table surrounded by a dozen chairs, high-tech communication equipment, and multiple screens displaying classified information. When Sarah entered the room, she immediately assessed the assembled group. Director Reynolds she recognized from intelligence photos, though he had aged considerably since she last saw his file. The other faces were unfamiliar, but their bearing and the way they arranged themselves around the table told her everything she needed to know about their roles and importance. "Captain Mitchell," Reynolds began without preamble, Or do you prefer one of your other names? We have records of at least 15 different identities you've used over the past 4 decades. Sarah took her seat at the table, her expression calm and professional. Captain Mitchell will be fine. I assume you've verified that I am who I claim to be? DNA analysis confirms it, replied a woman who introduced herself as Deputy Director Chen. Though I'll admit we had to dig deep to find comparison samples. Your official records were classified so highly that most people forgot you ever existed. Reynolds activated one of the screens displaying a world map marked with dozens of colored pins. We've spent the night correlating intelligence reports from the past 47 years. Every pin represents an event where we now suspect you were involved. Arms dealers who mysteriously disappeared, terrorist cells that were exposed at critical moments, hostages who were rescued under impossible circumstances. The map was covered in pins spanning 6 continents. Sarah studied it quietly, noting both the accuracy and the omissions. They had found perhaps 60% of her actual operations. How? Reynolds asked simply. How did you survive alone for nearly 5 decades? How did you maintain operational effectiveness without any official support? And most importantly, why are you here now? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, organizing thoughts and memories that spanned half a century. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and measured. The mission in 1977 was supposed to be routine intelligence gathering in Eastern Europe. Extract some documents, identify enemy assets, return home. But we were betrayed before we even crossed the border. She paused, her eyes focusing on something beyond the room. My team was captured. I escaped, but barely. I was wounded, alone, with no way to contact headquarters. The documents I had obtained revealed something much larger than anyone had anticipated. A network of foreign agents operating inside our own government. The room had fallen completely silent. Reynolds leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her words. I had 2 choices, Sarah continued. Return home and risk exposing the evidence to the same people who had betrayed my team, or stay in the field and work to unravel the network myself. I chose to stay. For 47 years? Chen asked incredulously. Time has a way of getting away from you when you're always running, Sarah replied. What started as a temporary necessity became a permanent mission. The network was larger and more dangerous than I had imagined. Every time I thought I was close to ending it, new threats would emerge. Reynolds activated another screen showing intelligence reports from various global conflicts over the past decades. You're telling us that you've been conducting a single, continuous operation for nearly half a century, without any official authorization or support? I'm telling you that I've been doing my job, Sarah replied firmly. The job I was trained for, the job I swore an oath to complete. General Morrison, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Sarah, your family reported you dead. Your parents held a funeral. Your sister spent decades wondering what happened to you. For the first time since entering the room, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was a deep sadness that hadn't been there before. I know, she whispered. I attended my sister's wedding from a distance in 1982. I was at my mother's funeral in 1995. I've watched my nephews grow up through photographs and school records, but I couldn't make contact without putting them in danger. The weight of her sacrifice hung in the air like a physical presence. These hardened intelligence professionals, accustomed to difficult operational decisions, struggled to comprehend the personal cost of her choices. The network you've been fighting, Reynolds said carefully. What can you tell us about its current status? Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device, an encrypted data drive that looked decades old, but had been modified with modern components. She placed it on the table. Everything is on there. Names, locations, financial records, communication patterns. 47 years of intelligence gathering. The network has evolved, adapted, but it still exists. And 3 days ago I discovered they're planning something that will make September 11th look like a minor incident. The room erupted in urgent whispers and rapid note-taking. Reynolds grabbed the data drive immediately, handling it like it contained nuclear secrets. "Why come forward now?" he asked. "After all these years of working alone, what changed?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated their lives to protecting their country, just as she had done in her own way. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of solitude and sacrifice. "Because I'm dying," she said quietly. "And because this is bigger than one person can handle alone." The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was deafening. Director Reynolds stared at the data drive in his hands as if it might explode. Deputy Director Chen's fingers had frozen over her notepad, her pen suspended in mid-air. General Morrison felt the blood drain from his face as the full implications of what they had just heard settled in. "What do you mean you're dying?" Reynolds asked, his voice barely steady. Sarah's expression remained calm, but there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion. 47 years of living on the streets, eating when I could, sleeping in abandoned buildings and under bridges. No regular medical care, constant stress, exposure to chemicals and toxins during operations. My body is breaking down. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing arms marked with scars and needle tracks, not from drugs but from years of administering her own medical treatments with whatever supplies she could acquire. "I estimate I have 6 months, maybe less. That's why I had to come forward now." Dr. Angela Foster, the base's chief medical officer, had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. She stepped forward now, her professional instincts overriding the classified nature of the meeting. "Captain Mitchell, with your permission, I'd like to run some tests. If you've been living the way you describe, there might be treatable conditions that—" "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come here for medical help," Sarah interrupted gently. "I came here because in approximately 72 hours, a terrorist cell is going to attempt to detonate a nuclear device in a major American city." The room exploded into activity. Reynolds was on his secure phone before Sarah finished speaking. Chen was already accessing her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Morrison grabbed the conference room phone and began barking orders to his staff. "Stop," Sarah said quietly, but with such authority that everyone froze mid-action. "Before you activate every protocol in the book and alert half of Washington, you need to understand something. The people planning this attack have been preparing for exactly this kind of response. They have assets inside our intelligence agencies. The moment you put this information through normal channels, they'll know we're onto them." Reynolds lowered his phone slowly. "Are you saying we have a leak?" "I'm saying you have multiple leaks at multiple levels and they've been there for decades," Sarah replied. "Why do you think I stayed in the shadows for so long? Every time I tried to work through official channels, operations were compromised and people died." She stood and walked to one of the screens displaying global intelligence data. With quick, precise movements, she began pointing to specific locations and dates. February 2019, the bombing in Jakarta that killed 8 CIA operatives. "I tried to warn them through back channels, but the information never reached the field team." September 2021, the failed extraction of assets in Belarus. "I had intelligence showing it was a trap, but couldn't get it to the right people without exposing my position." The pattern she was revealing was devastating. Decades of failed operations, lost lives, and missed opportunities could be traced back to compromised communications and infiltrated agencies. "How do we know you're not part of the problem?" Chen asked suspiciously. "How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception?" Sarah turned to face her, and for a moment, the deputy director saw something that made her step back involuntarily. It wasn't anger or threat. It was the look of someone who had sacrificed everything for a cause and was tired of being questioned about it. "Because if I wanted to harm this country, I've had 47 years and countless opportunities to do it," Sarah replied. "I could have sold the intelligence I've gathered to any number of foreign governments. I could have eliminated key personnel. I could have sabotaged operations from the inside. Instead, I've spent nearly half a century protecting American interests, while living like a ghost." Reynolds had been quietly reviewing something on his tablet. He looked up with a troubled expression. "The data on this drive, why, it's going to take weeks to properly analyze. If what you're saying is true and we only have 72 hours, then we don't work through official channels, Sarah said. We work the way I've been working for the past 47 years. Small team, minimal communication, maximum operational security. Morrison shook his head. Sarah, you're talking about conducting an unauthorized operation on American soil. I can't sanction that. Then don't sanction it, she replied simply. Give me access to the equipment I need and look the other way. When it's over, you can court-martial me if you want. But right now, I'm the only person in this room who knows how to operate without being detected by the network. The moral and legal implications of what she was suggesting were staggering. She was asking them to essentially go rogue, to conduct an operation outside all established protocols and chain of command. But as Reynolds studied the preliminary data from her drive, he realized she might be right. What exactly are you proposing? He asked carefully. Sarah moved to a blank whiteboard and began sketching a rough map of the United States. She marked several cities with red dots, then drew lines connecting them in a complex pattern. The device is currently in transit. The terrorists have been moving it between safe houses for the past month, never staying in one location for more than 48 hours. But I know their pattern. I know where they'll be tomorrow night. She marked a location outside Chicago with a large X. They have a facility here, an abandoned industrial complex that they've been using as a staging area. The plan is to transport the device to the target city on Thursday morning. We intercept it tomorrow night before it reaches its final destination. Chen studied the map with growing alarm. How do you know all this? How can you be certain? Because I've been tracking this cell for 3 years, Sarah replied. I infiltrated their communications network, identified their funding sources, and mapped their operational structure. I know their leader personally. We have a history going back to 1983. The personal nature of her statement caught everyone's attention. Reynolds leaned forward in his chair. What kind of history? Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression becoming distant. His name is Viktor Kozlov, former KGB, now freelance. I first encountered him in Prague in 1983 during an arms deal gone wrong. I killed his partner and destroyed his operation. He's been trying to find me ever since. So this is personal, Morrison observed. Everything is personal when you've been doing this job as long as I have, Sarah replied. But that doesn't make the threat any less real. Kozlov has spent 40 years building this network, gathering resources, and planning for this moment. The nuclear device is just the beginning. If this attack succeeds, it will trigger a chain of events that will destabilize governments worldwide. Dr. Foster, who had remained silent during the tactical discussion, spoke up again. Captain Mitchell, even if we accept everything you're telling us, you said yourself that you're in failing health. How can you possibly lead an operation like this? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room, but it was a sad, weary expression. Doctor, I've been living on borrowed time for years, but I have enough left to finish what I started. She turned back to the assembled group, her eyes moving from face to face, measuring their resolve and commitment. I'm not asking any of you to risk your careers or your lives. Just give me the tools I need and let me do what I do best. In 72 hours, this will all be over, one way or another. Reynolds looked at the data drive in his hands, then at the map Sarah had drawn, then at the faces of his colleagues. They were all thinking the same thing. This was either the most important intelligence breakthrough in decades or the most elaborate deception ever attempted. The problem was, they didn't have time to figure out which. The decision came down to a simple question of trust. Reynolds stared at Sarah Mitchell for a long moment, weighing decades of intelligence experience against the impossible story he was hearing. Finally, he made the choice that would either save thousands of lives or end his career. What do you need? He asked quietly. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested relief. A vehicle, basic surveillance equipment, 2 trusted operatives who can follow orders without asking questions, and access to the base's weapons locker. Nothing fancy. I work better with simple tools. You'll have them, Reynolds confirmed. But I want real-time communication, no going dark on us. Agreed with one condition, Sarah replied. This communication stays between us and this room. The moment information goes through standard intelligence channels, Kozlov will know we're coming. General Morrison pulled out his personal phone and began making calls. Within 30 minutes, a small team had been assembled. Master Sergeant Thompson, the veteran who had warned soldiers about discussing the mysterious woman, entered the conference room along with Captain Maria Santos, a special operations officer with extensive field experience. These two have been briefed on the need for absolute secrecy, Morrison explained. They understand this operation doesn't officially exist. Sarah studied the two soldiers carefully. Thompson had the steady demeanor of someone who had seen everything and could be trusted in any situation. Santos moved with the controlled energy of a professional who was ready for action, but disciplined enough to wait for orders. "Have either of you worked outside official channels before?" Sarah asked directly. Thompson nodded slowly. Desert Storm 1991. There were some operations that never made it into the after-action reports. Santos spoke more carefully. "I understand that sometimes the mission requires flexibility in how orders are interpreted." Sarah smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of approval she had shown. "Good. We leave in 2 hours. Pack light and bring personal weapons only. We're going to look like a group of travelers, not a military unit." As the team prepared for departure, Dr. Foster approached Sarah with a medical kit. "At least let me give you something for the pain. I can see you're struggling more than you're letting on." Sarah accepted the medical supplies gratefully. "Thank you, Doctor. You're more observant than most intelligence analysts." While Sarah reviewed maps and equipment lists, Reynolds worked frantically to verify the intelligence on her data drive. What he found was both fascinating and terrifying. The drive contained detailed information about terrorist financing, weapons trafficking, and covert operations spanning multiple decades. More importantly, it included real-time intelligence about current threats that matched reports his agency had been trying to confirm for months. Deputy Director Chen called from her workstation. "I've cross-referenced the financial data from Mitchell's drive with our recent intelligence. She's right about the network. We've been tracking some of these financial transactions for years without understanding the connections. Her data fills in gaps we didn't even know existed." Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. If Sarah's intelligence was accurate, it meant the terrorist network had been operating under their noses for decades, successfully avoiding detection by some of the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. 2 hours later, an unmarked civilian SUV left Fort Bradley through a rarely used service gate. To any observer, it appeared to contain 4 ordinary travelers. An older woman, 2 men, and a younger woman heading out for a weekend trip. The vehicle's license plates were registered to a company that existed only on paper, and its occupants carried identification that would pass casual inspection but wouldn't survive deep investigation. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, studying satellite imagery on a tablet computer. The industrial complex outside Chicago was exactly as she remembered it, a sprawling facility that had been abandoned for years, perfect for concealing illegal activities. She had been monitoring the site intermittently for months, watching the patterns of activity that indicated it was being used as more than just an empty building. "Target is approximately 6 hours ahead of us," she explained to her team as they drove through the Illinois countryside. "The facility has 3 main buildings connected by underground tunnels. Kozlov's people have established a sophisticated security perimeter, but they're expecting threats from law enforcement, not military personnel." Thompson, who was driving, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, how many hostiles should we expect?" "Minimum 12, maximum 20, Sarah replied. "They're well-trained and heavily armed, but they're not expecting this kind of response. Our advantage is surprise and the fact that they think I'm still operating alone." Captain Santos was reviewing building schematics on her own tablet. "What about the device itself? Do we know what we're looking for?" Sarah's expression grew grim. "Soviet-era nuclear warhead, probably from a decommissioned submarine. Kozlov acquired it through black market contacts in Ukraine about 5 years ago. It's been modified for remote detonation and is approximately the size of a large suitcase." The weight of their mission settled over the team. They were 4 people attempting to prevent a nuclear attack on American soil, operating without official authorization and with minimal backup. If they failed, thousands would die. If they were caught, their government would deny any knowledge of their actions. As evening approached, they stopped at a truck stop 30 miles from their target. Sarah used the opportunity to make contact with an asset she had cultivated years earlier. A local photographer who unknowingly provided surveillance of the industrial complex by taking pictures for urban exploration websites. The delivery truck arrived this morning, the photographer reported over an encrypted phone call. Same pattern as last month. Black panel van, 2 men in the cab, stayed for about 4 hours then left. But there's been more activity than usual today. Sarah thanked him and ended the call, then gathered her team around a map spread on their vehicle's hood. The device is there. Security will be heightened because they're preparing for transport tomorrow. We go in tonight, during the shift change at 0200 hours. Rules of engagement? Santos asked. Minimum necessary force, Sarah replied. We're here to secure the device and gather intelligence. But understand, these people will not surrender, and they will not hesitate to detonate the device if they feel cornered. If it comes down to their lives or the lives of thousands of innocent people, you know what choice to make. The final approach to the target took place in complete darkness. The team moved on foot across fields and through abandoned industrial areas, their military training allowing them to advance silently despite the unfamiliar terrain. Sarah led them with confidence that came from years of similar operations, her knowledge of the facility's layout proving accurate, despite the years that had passed since her last reconnaissance. From a concealed position overlooking the complex, they observed the security patterns. Guards moved in predictable rotations, their attention focused outward rather than on the possibility of infiltration from unexpected directions. The facility's age worked in the team's favor. Decades of deterioration had created numerous entry points that weren't visible on official building plans. Building 2, 3rd floor northeast corner, Sarah whispered, pointing to a specific window. That's where they'll have the device. Kozlov always uses the same type of location, defensible position with multiple escape routes. Thompson studied the building through night vision equipment. I count 4 guards on the perimeter, probably more inside. Standard patrol pattern every 15 minutes. We go in during the next rotation, Sarah decided. Santos and I take point. Thompson provides overwatch and we maintain radio silence unless there's immediate danger. As they prepared to move, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of fear and exhilaration that had sustained her through decades of covert operations. This might be her final mission, but it was also the most important. Everything she had sacrificed, every year she had spent in the shadows had led to this moment. The industrial complex loomed ahead of them like a concrete fortress, holding within its walls both the culmination of her life's work and the key to preventing a catastrophe that could change the world forever. In a few hours, they would either emerge victorious or not emerge at all. Sarah checked her weapon one final time and began moving toward the target, knowing that the homeless woman who had appeared at Fort Bradley's gate just 2 days earlier was about to complete the transformation back into Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Army Intelligence, one last time. The infiltration went exactly as Sarah had planned for the first 30 minutes. The team moved through the abandoned complex like ghosts, avoiding security cameras and guard patrols with precision born from years of experience. They reached Building 2 without incident, and Sarah's knowledge of the layout proved flawless as they navigated through darkened corridors filled with industrial debris. But as they approached the 3rd floor, Sarah held up her hand in a signal to stop. Something was wrong. The building was too quiet, the security too light. After 47 years of operations, she had developed an instinct for when situations weren't what they appeared to be. It's a trap, she whispered into her radio. Theo. Words had barely left her lips when floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire building. Alarms began wailing and the sound of running footsteps echoed from multiple directions. The team found themselves caught in a corridor with no immediate cover, surrounded by the sound of approaching enemies. How did they know? Santos demanded, pressing herself against a wall as automatic weapons fire erupted from both ends of the hallway. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as she returned fire with her sidearm. They didn't know about the team. They knew about me. This whole thing was designed to draw me out. A voice boomed through loudspeakers installed throughout the building, speaking in accented English that Sarah recognized immediately. "Sarah Mitchell, after 40 years you finally come to me directly. How refreshing to end our little game face to face." Viktor Kozlov's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and barely controlled rage. Sarah realized that her careful planning had been anticipated, that her patterns of operation had been studied and predicted. The hunter had become the hunted. "Thompson, status report," she called into her radio. "Pinned down on the second floor," came the reply. "Multiple hostiles, but I'm managing. What's the situation up there?" Before Sarah could respond, a new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors approaching fast. Through broken windows, she could see searchlights sweeping the complex as multiple aircraft surrounded the building. "This is Colonel Davis with Fort Bradley Tactical Response Team," a familiar voice announced over external loudspeakers. "All personnel inside the building, stand down immediately. You are surrounded." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The cavalry had arrived, but their presence would complicate everything. Kozlov was too experienced to be captured by conventional military tactics, and the nuclear device could be detonated at any moment if he felt completely cornered. "Sarah!" Kozlov's voice called out again, this time closer and without electronic amplification. "I have a proposition for you. Come to the northeast room on the third floor, come alone, and we can finish this properly." Santos grabbed Sarah's arm. "Ma'am, you can't seriously be considering that. It's obviously a trap within a trap." Sarah looked at her young colleague and saw herself 4 decades earlier, confident, dedicated, and not yet understanding the true cost of their profession. "Captain, sometimes the trap is exactly where you need to be." She handed Santos her radio and spare ammunition. "Get to Thompson's position and wait for the military to breach the building. When they do, make sure they understand the device could be booby-trapped." "What about you?" "I'm going to end this," Sarah replied simply. She moved through the building, with practiced stealth, avoiding the ongoing firefight between her team and Kozlov's people. The northeast room was exactly where she had predicted the device would be, but when she reached it, she found something unexpected. Viktor Kozlov sat calmly at a small table in the center of the room, looking remarkably similar to how she remembered him from their last encounter in 1983. The years had added gray to his hair and lines to his face, but his eyes still held the same cold intelligence that had made him such a formidable adversary. On the table beside him sat a metal briefcase, the nuclear device that had brought her out of the shadows. "You look terrible, Sarah," Kozlov said, conversationally as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. 47 years of living like a vagrant has not been kind to you." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him while scanning the room for other threats. "You look pretty good for someone who's about to spend the rest of his life in an American prison." Kozlov laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Prison? My dear Sarah, you still don't understand. This was never about the bomb. The bomb is just theater. This was about bringing you home." "What are you talking about?" Kozlov stood slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Do you really think I spent 40 years building a terrorist network just to blow up one American city? I could have done that decades ago with much less effort." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You've been leaving a trail. All these years, you've been deliberately creating operations that you knew I would have to stop." Finally, the great Sarah Mitchell begins to understand. Kozlov confirmed. "Every arms deal I disrupted, every terrorist cell I exposed, every hostage I helped rescue, they were all carefully orchestrated to keep you operational, to keep you in the shadows, where you belonged." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as the implications became clear. "The network I've been fighting was designed to give your life purpose," Kozlov finished. "Without an enemy to fight, what would the great Captain Mitchell have become? A desk officer? A civilian? I gave you 47 years of meaningful work." The sound of approaching footsteps indicated that the military assault team was getting closer. Kozlov reached slowly for the briefcase, his finger hovering over a small device attached to its handle. "But now you're dying, and our game is ending," he continued. "So I thought we should conclude with something spectacular. This device is real, Sarah, and when I press this button it will detonate in exactly 60 seconds. Just enough time for one last chase, one final operation." Sarah realized that everything she had believed about her life, her mission, her purpose, had been an elaborate manipulation. The man she had been hunting had actually been protecting her, giving her a reason to exist while keeping her isolated from the normal world she could no longer be part of. "Why?" she asked, the question carrying the weight of nearly 5 decades. "Because you were the only opponent worthy of my respect," Kozlov replied. "And because I loved you, in my way." Prague, 1983. "Do you remember what happened before the Yayal shooting started?" Sarah did remember. A brief conversation in a hotel bar, 2 intelligence officers from opposing sides discovering they understood each other better than they understood their own colleagues. A moment of human connection in a world of deception and betrayal. "The bomb, Victor, don't do this. The bomb is a gift, Sarah. One last mission to prove you were right to live the life you chose. Stop me and save thousands of lives. Fail, and know that your sacrifice had meaning." His finger moved toward the detonation switch as the sound of breaching charges echoed through the building. Sarah had perhaps seconds to make a choice that would define not just the end of her life, but the meaning of everything that had come before. Outside, the helicopters circled in the darkness, their searchlights cutting through the night like accusations. Inside, a homeless woman who had once been a decorated officer faced the culmination of a lifetime spent in service to her country, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest victories come from confronting the deepest truths about ourselves. The nuclear device sat between them like a metal representation of all the choices that had led to this moment, waiting for one final decision that would determine whether Sarah Mitchell's story ended with salvation or tragedy.